There is a buy link for these plans in the video description. As always, they will print full size on A4 paper. As usual, we'll start with the side plates for the magazine. I'm doing it a bit differently this time because I'm cutting these out individually. They're not quite symmetrical. This one has 2 screw holes here. This one just has one over here. To keep it nice and precise, I'll be using this piece of wood as a drilling guide. Drill all those holes to the same depth. They won't quite go through the plate. So these are the finished plates. 6 of those holes will allow a pin to move freely, but again they are blind holes. On this plate we've also got 2 screw holes that go right through, and this one we've got a screw hole that's also blind. It doesn't have to be, but that makes it neat and tidy. For the barrel, you could use either large diameter dowel or PVC, but this is very expensive and this doesn't look very nice. So what I've instead done is bought a whole lot of quad, which was very cheap, and glue it together like so. Another advantage of this is it'll have a square hole in the middle, and that'll be useful for attaching it to the trunnion. Clamp it, rubber bands of course. All these bits need to be made of 25mm thick wood, which in Australia at least is a very uncommon size. Because they are all 19mm across, I can do this simply by cutting a 25mm wide piece off some 19mm board. And to make those blocks, all I have to do is cut these bits to length. To make this piece, I just glue the template onto the edge, make that cut across there. Nice and easy. You can make the rotors 2 at a time from 6mm ply, double-sided taped together. After a bit of trial and error, those pins should turn freely without moving from side to side too much. Once those pins are cut to the correct length, they can be put into place. These ones can be hammered into the moving parts. To find a screw that's large enough to engage that channel down the middle of the barrel. Pretty easy to attach the trunnion and then glue it onto the side plate, the one with 1 screw hole in it. Glue that additional reinforcing block, and this piece also has a spring screwed onto here, which will hook onto another screw that goes through here. As for the 3mm thick side plates, as usual, pin 2 plates together here, and I've glued an extra hole in here, and cut them out together. We'll drill this one later and I'll show you why. So at this point, plates are cut out but still pinned together. And I'm going to flip it over and glue this piece onto the right hand side, and then drill through all of those plates. So what you want is for this dowel to fit loosely through that hole in the receiver plates and tightly through the 2 moving parts. With the side plates finished, you can glue these 3 blocks onto the left hand side plate. They're all very simple, no fancy cuts or holes, except for an optional screw hole if you want to install the bipod. Screw on the right hand side plate next, and this hole here is the most important one to line up, so find some kind of pin that fits snugly, and that will ensure that these holes are perfectly aligned and you can put those screw holes in now. The next step is to align and glue the hammer. So that hammer should sit right in the center of these 2 panels, and this dowel should not protrude past the surface, because that will eventually be covered over. Make sure that's perpendicular and then glue it in place. Up next you can work on adding the springs. The trigger is very lightly sprung, that's easy enough. And this little block with the screw on it, I've actually used double-sided tape to attach that, just so I can test the system and make sure it works. Be careful, make sure that this doesn't get in the way of the hammer, like mine does. Yeah, that's a more permanent fixture. Notice how that spring is offset to clear the hammer. Make the shoulder stock out of a contrasting piece of wood if you can. It's pretty broad, so you may need to join a few pieces together. That just glues in like that. Best way to make these spaces is with slices of small diameter PVC pipe. Install the charging handle. I'll have to take this screw out and drill a hole there. So I've cut the face of the axle flush, and I've also put this mark in place so that it makes it easy to line up that handle, because you want that screw to go back in that hole each time. So this way I know that that is aligned. Make a wooden knob. You can turn it yourself or buy it or whatever, but you can actually adjust the rate of fire by changing the weight. If I have more washers here, it will slow the rate of fire down. If I take that washer out, it'll speed it up just a little bit. These pieces just slot together like so. And you can saw that out later, so it's nice and smooth. Of course, the other way to do this is you just cut it from plywood, and I've got templates for that as well. I'll be attaching the magazine with bolts from the inside so that it can be held on with wing nuts. The real magazine catch, so the catch for the magazine that goes here, is attached to the false magazine. So it's just screwed in place to the inside, and there's a small spring there. And with the real magazine in place, you can mark and remove the side plate and make a cutout for that magazine catch. I like the look of the bipod on the Madsen, but I know for a fact I'm never going to use it. So I decided to design the absolute simplest bipod possible. I've got this block with these 4 holes in it, and those holes fit these dowels, but because of this cross-shaped cut, it allows the dowel to compress a bit and press fit nicely in there every time. In these holes, bipod's deployed, and in these holes the bipod is stowed, which it will probably stay like that 99% of the time. That block is just screwed onto the front of the receiver. I'm going to disassemble the Madsen so you can see how it all goes together. It's just a little bit easier and faster if I take it apart rather than put it together. Start with the magazine. Catches on this side. And here you can see the problem with the bipod. If the bipod swings too far either way, it locks up. I'll put that curved surface so if it's just a little bit in the way, the magazine can push it out of the way. But you may want to consider that before building the bipod. Anyway, the bipod is just screwed onto the front. Next up, we'll take the faux magazine off, and I've used these little knobs instead of wing nuts so that if I put it face down, it won't damage whatever surface it's resting on. So they just unscrew, and then the magazine can come off. I've got these 2 little washers to keep those parts separate, otherwise those varnished surfaces are going to want to stick together. On the other side, you can see how the magazine latch is screwed in place, and there's that little spring. I won't bother taking that apart. Up next, we'll take off the charging handle. You can again see that mark, and it makes it easy to align, and then that just slides off. It's got a spacer there which you don't actually need, but I made it so I may as well use it. And the knob itself is just screwed in place. One thing I did forget to cover is these little plates here that attach to the stock. They're not necessary, but they make the whole thing look a lot better and feel nicer in the hand too. So here are our incredibly complicated internals. We've got our trigger over here, soft spring in there, and a couple of spacers. And we've got our hammer over here again, a couple of spacers. PVC pipe works best. You can see how that works. Very simple. Spring is hooked onto here, offset nicely. And you can also see the bolts that are used to secure the magazine. If you look really carefully, you can see there's a hex nut threaded on to ensure that they don't spin around. And we've also got a little sponge buffer here to absorb the impact of the hammer. And last of all, we'll take a look at the magazine. So the end has a very simple notch for the rubber bands, nice and oversized to make it easy to load. It is really important that the side plate that screws off is on the same side as the magazine catch, because that needs a cutout made for it. You can see that catch would be a little bit tricky to cut, unless of course the side plate comes off, like so. This pin sits in here, and that is just to interface with the lug over here at the front, like that. And you can see there's another lug at the back, so very strong, very stable system. As for the moving parts, we've got 6mm marine ply, doubled over 6 for this one, and just a light duty coil spring in there. Again, don't think I have to take that apart any further. Loading the magazine is pretty easy. You get your size 19 rubber band, hook it to the front, bring it back, click the rotor back and keep going until you've loaded about 20 rubber bands.